Hey guys, I'm trying to hit 100k by the end of the year and we're really close, so please subscribe. It would mean so much to me personally. Leave a comment, talk to me, join my Discord. I love talking to you guys. And also, while you're down there in the description, go ahead and follow my Instagram. Now today I wanted to read some more creepy, cool Reddit stories to you guys. Some unimaginable Reddit stories. These are creepy, spooky, and sure to keep you up at night. So go ahead and turn off the lights, get comfy in bed, and let's get into this. The first one is, I found an endless hole on some land I recently bought. It changes anything I sent down in bizarre ways. I recently bought some land and a small cabin on the outskirts of Frost Hollow. The town had been in decline for decades. A constant stream of businesses and people left Frost Hollow every year. I heard rumors about high missing persons rates as well as insane homicide and rates that plagued the town consistently. This didn't bother me in the least, however. In my mind, it just meant that the land was dirt cheap and that I wouldn't have too many neighbors to worry about. My closest neighbor, Art, was a sheep farmer, an ancient man with a cantankerous voice and a back like a broken board. He stood only about 5 feet tall, always wearing his trademark blue overalls and a wide brim hat. He stood only about 5 feet tall, always wearing his trademark blue coveralls and a wide brim hat. When I first found the hole, I tried shining a light down and then throwing heavy rocks inside. When only silence greeted me after a minute, I quickly realized that neither method would help me realize the depth of the hole. I immediately went over to Art's ranch house. Art had lived in Frost Hollow his whole life, and I figured that if anyone would know anything about the pit, he would. Sheep milled about on the grassy fields around his house, meditatively chewing as they slowly ambled forward. Art and I both lived on top of the same hill, on a spot cleared of trees and brush about 1/10 of a mile across on the peak. My dog, Peaches, ran by my side, her mouth wide open in excitement and dripping with silver streams of saliva. I saw Art sitting on his porch on his weather-worn home, smoking a pipe and staring across the field. His eyes ratcheted to me when the rickety porch steps groaned in protest under my weight. All of the paint had long ago peeled off the walls and shutters of his ancient home. "Joshua," he said in a thick drawl, "how are you settling in?" He took another long drag from the pipe. Smoke wreathed his face and white beard. He reminded me of a thin, diminutive Santa Claus. "It's very interesting," I admitted. The cabin still had books and trinkets left behind from the previous owner. It seemed like whoever it was had left in a hurry. I was happy to find some leather-bound hardcover works by Robert Browning, T.S. Eliot, and others when I first purveyed the bookshelves. But I'm really wondering about the hole, the one with the retaining wall around it. What is it? I figured it wasn't a well, for this hole was about 10 feet across and seemed to go down for at least 400 or 500 feet. The top of it was ringed by a perfectly circular stone wall a few feet high, presumably to keep people or animals from falling in by accident. "If I knew that, I would be a wise man indeed," Art whispered sagely. "That hole has been there for as long as anyone knows, before the town was even started. A few people who live around here have used it to get rid of their trash for decades. We just throw whatever rubbish we have into the hole and voila, it's gone forever." Though my wife never trusted him, at least before she died. Maria always asked me not to go near it. I frowned. Art rarely talked about his dead wife. I knew she had passed away a few years earlier, but he refused to share any of the details of her death. "That could potentially poison the groundwater," I said. "I'd like to ask you to stop throwing trash in the hole until I can get it looked at. I think Maria may have been right to be leery about abusing the pit." Art leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "Sonny, wells around here never go below 200 or 300 feet. I can guarantee you that that pit is neither a well in any conventional sense nor connected to the underground reservoirs. As far as we've been able to tell, the walls are solid all the way down. They turn into some sort of glassy sandstone and they go deep, at least a few thousand feet down." "How do you know all this?" I asked, curious. "Have you been studying it?" His expression brightened at this. "The previous owner of your cabin, Mel, asked me and a couple others to come over. This was way back around 2001, I guess, the first time I saw it. We did a few experiments, ran some lines to try to see how far it went down. We never did figure out where the bottom was, if it even had a bottom, but there were other weird effects from sending things down," Art said. "Like what?" I asked. He winked at me. "Meet me there in an hour at sunset and I'll show you," he said. I woke Peaches up and headed back to my cabin. She barked excitedly by my side, running circles around me playfully. I went to the hole early, watching and waiting as night descended. In the cloudless sky, the stars came out one by one, faintly twinkling like broken glass. I must have gotten lost in a trance because the next thing I knew, Art was putting a small bird-like hand on my shoulder. His ancient fingers trembled nervously, though I didn't know why. I saw him carrying a threadbare canvas bag around his shoulder. With a grunt, he put it down on the black earth surrounding the stone walls of the hole. I'd left Peaches outside to run around and tire herself out. "What's all this?" I asked, feeling a creeping suspicion rise up my spine. Art gave his inscrutable Santa Claus smile, putting his dirty pipe out of a pocket and lighting it. "You'll see," he said, pulling a long, heavy rope out of the bag. At the end, it was tied to a closed wicker basket. He kept reaching into the canvas bag and his hand came up with a plastic grocery bag filled to the brim with ice. It had been tied and knotted. He looked back at me as he gingerly lowered the ice into the wicker basket. "You wanted to know what the hole was?" he asked, handing me the rope. "Let this basket drop down as far as the rope will go and maybe you'll see for yourself." Together we lowered the basket down into the hole. The darkness swallowed it instantly like a hungry mouth. I wondered what kind of game Art was playing. I figured that by the time we raised it, we would have a basket filled with melted ice and nothing more. "It doesn't always work, you understand," Art said. "But when it does, well, it's one of the damn strangest things I've ever seen." We reached the end of the rope, let the basket hang for a few seconds, then started pulling it back up. The whole process took a couple minutes. "You know there are dozens of types of ice?" Art asked as we struggled with the rope. "Some kinds of ice are burning hot and will scald your flesh from your bones. Others are hard as steel and as cold as liquid nitrogen. Bizarre, huh? On Earth we don't really see them, but on other planets, under high pressure, ice can take some truly alien forms." I watched the basket rise out of the shadows, appearing suddenly as if it had broken through the surface of a dark ocean. There seemed to be a light coming from inside of it. Carefully, we pulled it out and laid it next to the stone wall. "Go ahead," Art said, sitting down on the wall's ledge with a huff. It gave me vertigo just seeing him there on the edge of an abyss that stretched thousands of feet. Art apparently had no fear of heights, however. He pulled out his pipe and lit a match. "Well, what are you waiting for? You wanted answers. Open it up and see for yourself." I knelt down next to the wicker basket. I inhaled deeply as I raised one of its covers, flipping it over in a heartbeat. I stared down in amazement at what I saw. The ice cubes were all still in their original shape, but now they looked like they were burning with an inner fire. Orange light flickered from the insides of them, twisting and spiraling in tiny cyclones. I saw they had totally melted the plastic bag, and by this point were starting to leave scorch marks on the wicker. Black smoke rose from the basket. Art stepped forward, taking a gnarled old hand and flipping the basket over before the burning ice could ignite the material. "What is it?" I asked, backing away from the ice cubes. Art shrugged, getting up with a creaking of bones and a heavy groan. "To be honest, Joshua, I can't give you all the answers," he said. "The story with the hole is long and very weird. We don't know where it came from or why it does what it does. Mel and I experimented with it for years. He even tried sending live animals down there." Art's wrinkled face seemed to go pale at the memory. "What happened when he sent an animal down there?" I asked, intensely curious but also somewhat sickened. Art just shook his head. "I don't want to talk about it," he said. "Just pretend I never brought it up. Some things are better left forgotten." Art left a few minutes later. He gave a friendly wave as he disappeared into the night, but I was far too focused on the burning cubes to pay him any attention. I ran back to my house, trying to find a way to transport them. I found a shovel and ran back, gingerly picking them up with it. I wanted to keep them for observation. I had a small wood-burning stove in the cabin and threw the fiery ice cubes into the cold ashes. As I threw logs on top of them, the wood ignited as if it had been soaked in gasoline, sending sputtering blue flames up. I was sitting down in front of the strange fire show when I heard high-pitched squeals of pain split the air. I instantly recognized the yelping cries of Peaches. I grabbed a shotgun from next to the door and ran outside. The growls and barking had formed into a deafening screech by this point. My eyes widened in horror as I realized what had happened. A brown bear had Peaches by the neck. Its powerful jaws crushed the pit bull's flesh in an instant, and Peaches' cries faded to a whisper, the light in her pupils slowly dying. Her eyes rolled back in her head. I raised the shotgun and sprayed a round of buckshot at the bear. Its rolling eyes turned toward me, its sharp fangs gnashing as it dropped Peach's twitching body. It started sprinting straight at me with an insane expression of bloodlust on its crazed, furry face. Everything seemed to slow down as I met the creature's eyes and shot it in the mouth. It stopped in its tracks, dripping thick streams of blood from its chin and neck. A single heartbeat later, it turned and sprinted back towards the dark forest in a blur, leaving the dead body of Peaches in its wake. Sickened by the brutal death of my beloved Peaches, I wiped tears away as I went inside to grab a comforter. I wrapped her mutilated, bleeding form in the thick blanket and drove the dog's corpse over to the hole. "Goodbye, Peaches," I said in a voice choked with emotion. I had wrapped the dog up like a mummy. Her body felt heavy and stiff. I inhaled deeply, heaving as I pushed Peaches up on the retaining wall. I felt her cooling blood soaking through the comforter. After resting for a moment, I slid Peaches over the edge, watching her tumble down into the endless darkness. Her body fell straight down without hitting any of the rocky sides. Within a few moments, Peaches had disappeared forever, or so I thought at the time. I remembered waking up early the next morning, hearing a heavy rhythmic bouncing and thudding coming from the direction of the pit. I blinked my eyes blearingly, seeing the first bloody streaks of dawn covering the world like a blanket. Then I remembered Peach's death the previous night and the strangeness with the hole. Sadness and anxiety crushed my heart at the memory. The sound of grunting and hard thuds came bouncing back again. I threw on some clothes running outside to see what was making such a racket. I saw a Mexican-looking fellow unloading a truck full of bald, damaged tires into the hole. He was whistling as he worked, his tanned face gleaming with sweat. He had backed the bed of the rusty pickup to the perimeter of the retaining wall. The thudding sound was the tires smashing off the sides of the smooth, rocky walls as they tumbled endlessly down. "Hey!" I yelled, striding forward with large steps. He glanced back at me, his expression never changing. He just continued clearing out the dozens of tires stacked up 5 feet high in the bed. "Morning," he responded cheerfully. "You're up early, eh?" "Because of you. Who are you? What are you doing on my property?" I asked, narrowing my eyes at the intruder. He stretched out a thin, grime-streaked hand. I stared down at it as if it were a dead slug. "My name's Miguel, and I've been coming here for years, man," he said in a thick accent. "I've thrown thousands of tires down here. No one cares. The dumps will pay you to take them off their hands. They don't want to deal with the red tape, right?" "Thousands?" I asked. Miguel just nodded proudly. I tried to imagine how much junk must be at the bottom of the hole. There must be hundreds of feet of decaying animals, rusting machinery, flat tires, and whatever other garbage was unlucky enough to find itself eternally imprisoned in this endless pit. Miguel opened his mouth, about to say something, but his words were cut off as a cacophonous wail tore its way up and out of the hole. The eerie scream had a grating, metallic quality to it. I felt goosebumps rise all over my body as Miguel's eyes widened. He stared down into the eternal shadows, leaning over the retaining wall. The shrieking ended as abruptly as it had started. "What the?" he started to say, his bronze skin appearing much paler than when I had first seen him. His brown eyes stared ahead, unbelieving and frightened. The screaming started again, much closer and louder. It sent shockwaves of sound traveling up through the air. I saw the retaining wall shake like a leaf on a tree. A moment later, it crumbled and fell to pieces before my eyes. The metallic wailing faded off again, abruptly plunging us into deafening silence. Miguel gave a loud shriek of surprise and terror as his arms windmilled crazily. He tried to catch himself as the black, lifeless soil surrounding the hole crumbled beneath his feet. I instinctively threw myself back as more and more earth slid into the hole. Miguel tried to crawl up the loose sand, his eyes wide with animal panic. He reached out a trembling hand towards me, but the sands underneath him were flowing like a waterfall. I reached my hand toward him in a futile attempt, watching his rolling eyes as he slid down and disappeared in a single instant. His scream echoed up for what seemed like a very long time. After a minute, it grew fainter and eventually disappeared. I stood in stunned silence, staring down at the hole. The entire retaining wall had fallen in, leaving jagged pieces of stone poking out of the earth like broken teeth. As usual, the pit had eaten everything hungrily. There was no sign of the life it had consumed so suddenly, no change in the thick curtain of shadows. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but a sharp feeling of disappointment pierced my chest, though I wasn't sure why. I stared between the rusted brown pickup truck and the hole as if expecting a magic trick to take place. My thoughts slowly returned in a jumbled mess, a stream of consciousness garble that told me to find help. I sprinted blindly across the dead earth towards the grassy field surrounding Art's rickety house. Art was already out under the bleary early morning sun, letting the sheep stream out in excited lines from the wooden barn out back. Sweating and hyperventilating, I gave a high-pitched, terrified yell. He jumped, spinning around to look at me. "Art, something bad's happened at the pit. Someone fell in," I screamed. His face turned chalk white, his thin bird-like face falling into a pensive, serious frown. He slowly ambled toward me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Show me," he simply said. Art followed behind, his old man's gait slowed by a pronounced limp. It seemed to take forever to head back toward the pit. He saw the rusty pickup from a distance, his small, watery eyes widening. "Oh shit, it's Miguel," he whispered grimly. I saw the collapsed retaining wall. The bed of the pickup truck was still open, patiently parked a few feet away from the place where the soil had collapsed like a melting glacier. "Yeah, I talked to him for a few minutes," I said, not bringing up the tires. A dozen bald, flat tires still sat, waiting in the bed of the truck. "What am I supposed to do? Call the cops?" Art froze at this, his normally placid face falling into a grimace. His eyes met mine, as cold and blue as an Alaskan glacier. "Do not call the police," he said, his tone steelier than I had ever heard it. "If the government finds out about this, they will steal your land and probably murder you. Maybe murder me just for good measure. Hell, look what happened to Frank Olson during MK Ultra. The US government threw him out a window and made it look like a suicide just to prevent the media from finding out that the CIA was torturing and drugging US citizens, giving them LSD and subjecting them to prolonged physical and that was just over LSD. What will they do if they find this? We have no idea what kind of power lives down there. So what, we're just going to pretend like nothing happened?" I spat back, my face flushing. "What about that guy's family? They'll never know where he went." Art just shook his head. "Trust me, Joshua, it's far better to leave them in the dark. If they get involved, they might find themselves getting thrown down the pit as well." Art pointed to the pickup truck with a shaking finger. "Just put it in neutral and roll it inside. Get rid of the evidence. No one ever needs to know what lies rotting at the bottom of that abyss." Art watched me with an amused half-smile as I got into the pickup truck. The entire cab smelled like tacos and french fries. I saw discarded fast food wrappers all over the seats and floor. "Disgusting," I muttered, starting the engine and putting it in neutral. The engine idled like an old man with pneumonia, gurgling and sputtering in rhythmic waves. I jumped out onto the soft black soil. Deep down, I knew Art was right, though I still felt sick and guilty about covering up this man's death. I imagined Miguel's broken body down there among the thousands of tires, twisted among the rubble with a silent scream still frozen on his lips. "Can you give me a hand with this?" I asked Art as I got behind the truck, preparing to start pushing. I glanced over, but he wasn't looking at me or the pickup truck. He stared intently past me with a look of horror. I followed his line of sight, seeing he was staring at the border of the dark evergreen forest 50 or 60 feet away. My eyes instantly met those of Miguel's, but he seemed different. I squinted, seeing his eyes were white, crying scarlet tears that streamed down his face. His jaw looked shattered. It hung limply open, sharp pieces of bone poking out through the skin. His clothes were ripped and stained in a rainbow of dark fluids. Oil spot rainbows glimmered next to drippings of thick, clotted blood. Peaches stood by his side, but like Miguel, the dog had changed in death. Her eyes had lost their pupils and irises. Under the dim, dark light, they gleamed a pale cataract white. Bloody saliva frothed from her silently gnashing jaws. But that wasn't the most horrifying thing. Thousands of blood-red worms ate away at their loose flesh. They fell from Miguel's gray, lifeless skin like raindrops in a heavy storm. Each looked about the size of a maggot. As the carpet of squirming larvae ate away at their hosts, new streams of clotted blood slowly ran down their bodies with the consistency of sludge. I felt sick waves of nostalgia seeing Peaches standing there, chunks of her neck still missing from the bear attack. I had to constantly remind myself that this was not Peaches. This was some abomination from the pit, some dark twisting of my innocent dog's flesh. Oh God, Maria was right. Art whispered in a voice choked with emotion. We should have never come back here. He grabbed my arm with an iron grip, his terror giving his frail hands a seemingly superhuman strength. Peaches and Miguel didn't move. They simply stood there, wavering on their feet, their eyes as blank as those of corpses. Let's just go, I whispered back. They're not moving. I'm not even sure there's any consciousness behind those blank eyes. They remind me of zombies. They might just stay there. But as soon as we took a step away from Miguel and Peaches, they came to life. I heard a long, low, hissing sound that tore its way out of their throats in unison. It echoed like the hissing of many snakes. These things must have been what murdered my wife, Art mumbled, more to himself than to me. A look of shock fell over his wrinkled face. Oh God, it was the pit all along. All of the misfortune and tragedies, it's the center of all of it. I was about to respond when the corpses took off after us with a vengeance. Peaches sprinted forward, the sound of grinding bone splinters in her shattered canine body rising in volume as she came at us. But none of the reanimated corpses seemed to feel any pain. Miguel blindly staggered forward, lunging in strange, dragging steps. The crimson maggots eating away at his body had reached his face and eyes by this point, leaving small rivulets of cold gore wherever they feasted. Keep it away from me, Art screamed, taking off as fast as his old man's body would allow. With his pronounced limp, he didn't stand a chance. I sprinted away, passing the old man in seconds. A moment later, I heard a heavy thud and a whoosh of air. I glanced back, seeing Peaches standing on the prone man's chest. She ripped at his shoulder and arms, tearing off chunks of flesh with every bite. Art wailed like a man being burned alive. The red maggots continuously fell off Peach's body. To my horror, I saw them instantly start burrowing their way into Art's body, slithering into his mouth and nose. Miguel was only a few feet behind the struggling pair, coming straight at me. I headed towards my cabin, trying to block out the dying screams of Art. I flew through the door, slamming it shut behind me. A single heartbeat later, I heard Miguel's body thud into the other side. Frantically, I threw my weight against it and locked it. I lunged for my shotgun, which I always kept propped up next to my door. One of the windows next to the door shattered. I saw a bloody hand reaching in. Miguel blindly climbed up on the sharp shards of glass, ripping open his stomach and chest in the process. Fresh waterfalls of clotted gore and dancing worms slowly dribbled down his mutilated flesh. Another window shattered a moment later. A pale white hand reached in. I saw the reanimated body of Art, his flimsy dead eyes rolling back and forth over the room of my cabin. When they saw me, they stopped, focusing on me with an insane ferocity. Miguel slunk toward me, his skin a carpet of writhing red maggots now. They skittered all over my wooden floor, slowly crawling toward me, hungry for living tissue. I raised the gun, pointing it at his face. It was half gone by this point, the jawbone hanging limply from a mass of half-digested flesh. I fired, blowing the skull-like face into a mist of blood and bone splinters. And yet, even missing most of his face, Miguel didn't stop. Bleeding heavily as his brains leaked out of his forehead, he staggered forward, grabbing at me. I took the stock of the shotgun and slammed it into the bullet wound in the front of his head. There was a sickening wet crunch as he fell back, his hands blindly swiping the air in an attempt to reach me. He continued gurgling and hissing blood. Art had nearly finished crawling into the other window by this point. Out of ideas, I took the opportunity to escape towards the back of the cabin, away from these reanimated bodies. I saw my car parked on the other side of the cabin, only about 20 feet away. I looked both ways out of the back door before flinging it open and sprinting towards freedom. The coast looked clear, but as I reached the door, a heavy thudding of paws came running around the side of the cabin. Peaches snapped at the air with an insane bloodlust, her fur skittering with a carpet of maggots. I pointed the shotgun at her, constantly reminding myself that this was not the real Peaches. She lunged forward, grabbing my ankle as I fired. The bullet ripped her back apart, revealing part of the spine and ribs. The white bone poked out through the ragged strands of flesh for a few moments until the crimson maggots skittered over the wound and covered it. I felt a burning pain as her powerful jaws bit into my leg. She shook her head from side to side, nearly throwing me off my feet. The pain radiated up my left leg. More small agonies like burning drops of lava covered my arms and hands. I realized that some of the biting maggots had landed on me. In a fit of pure panic, I grabbed the shotgun and shoved the metal barrel into one of Peach's eyes. The orb exploded in a dribble of vitreous fluid before I fired. Peach's head disintegrated under the onslaught of the buckshot. I felt her jaws release a second later. Staggering back, I stumbled towards the car. I flung open the door and slammed it shut, locking it. I looked down at my arms, seeing the worms eating their way down towards the muscle, biting through the skin with terrifying efficiency. Quickly, I began plucking them out, squishing them between my fingers. They exploded like tiny water balloons filled with blood. I looked up, seeing that Miguel, Art, and Peaches all stood in front of the car. They looked like little more than ragged pieces of decaying flesh by this point. I started the car and accelerated rapidly towards them, hoping to crush all these eldritch creatures in one fell swoop. All three lunged to the side, twisting in jerky, zombie-like movements. Even without faces, Miguel and Peaches were still incredibly fast. Without looking back, I drove away, leaving the pit and its many strange mysteries behind forever. He is watching us. I woke in the middle of the night to find my boyfriend sitting on the end of our bed, staring into the dark corner of our bedroom. I called out to him groggily, "Jack?" He didn't respond. "Jack," I called again. He was still and completely quiet. I moved to the end of the bed and looked at him. The look on his face froze my blood. It's as if he wasn't there. His eyes were wide open. His pupils were like dinner plates as he stared endlessly at the dark corner of our room. Needless to say, nothing like this had happened before. Jack wasn't a sleepwalker. He usually slept through the night just fine. No tossing or turning or even grinding his teeth. He was gripping his knees with both hands. I reached out and gently put my hand on his. I swept his brown hair out of his eyes and softly said, "Jack, let's go back to bed." I wasn't trying to wake him. They say you're not supposed to wake a sleepwalker. I was trying to guide him back under the covers, but suddenly he snapped out of it and the life came back into his eyes, and he looked at me. "Haley?" He was clearly confused. "I woke up and found you sitting here on the end of the bed. You looked completely out of it," I said. "Damn, really? That's creepy." He blinked a lot and looked around the room. "Let's go back to bed," I said, and we did. We got up a couple hours later, around 5 a.m. He would go in at 6 and work 12 to 16 hours before dragging himself back home. We assumed that was the reason for his strange behavior, so we made a plan to get to bed earlier. He got home around 9 p.m. and went immediately to bed. I joined him a couple hours later. I slid under the covers, he turned over and put his arm around me, and I was out. I woke up with a start this time. Again, Jack was sitting on the end of the bed, staring into the corner. "Jack," I hissed at him. I'll admit that this time I was not in the mood. It's selfish, I know, but I just wanted to sleep. I managed to pull myself out of bed. I sat down next to him. Again, his eyes were fixed on the dark, far corner of our bedroom. I grabbed his knee and gently shook it. "Jack, we have to go back to..." Then Jack said something. It sounded like Swan. I leaned in close to him, fully awake now and chills going up my arm. "What did you say, Jack?" I was ready to give up and pull him back to bed rather than sit up and try to translate gibberish, but then he raised his hand. He extended his index finger and pointed into the dark corner, and he whispered, "He's watching us." A shock of fear ran through my body like lightning. I slowly turned from Jack to the corner where he pointed. I stared into the darkness but saw nothing. What did I expect to see then? A ghost? Then I jumped up and moved to the side of the bed and snapped on the lamp on the side table. I looked over at the corner of the room one more time to be sure. There was nothing there. Did it happen again? Jack was looking at me, blinking his eyes rapidly with a kind of anguish on his face. I remember it this time. I sat next to him on the bed. I could see the bedroom, but I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I said. He nodded. It was as if something was forcing me to stare into the corner. I was just staring into the darkness until I began to see something emerge from the wall. He looked terrified. It was a nightmare, I said. I rubbed his back and kissed him. It felt like I was conjuring something, he added. A nightmare, I repeated. Let's go back to bed. Beep, beep, beep. It was Jack's alarm on his phone. It was 5 a.m. and time for him to get ready to go to work, even on a Saturday. Hell, Jack groaned. I'll start the coffee, I said as I made my way down the hall. I decided not to tell Jack what he was saying in the night. He's watching us. It was probably nothing anyway, just a nightmare. I handed Jack his travel mug of black coffee, gave him a kiss, and watched him step out the door into the still, dark morning. I had the day off from work. After some coffee and reading, it was time to get the house in order. I started in the bedroom. I was making the bed when I got a feeling I couldn't shake. It felt like I was being watched. I looked over at the corner of the room and almost screamed. On the corner walls of the room was what looked like the silhouette of a man. It was the outline of a full body. There was clearly a head, shoulders, and torso cast into the corner of the room. I watched the figure for a second and something seemed off about it, apart from the obvious strangeness of his presence in general. The figure did not seem to move like a shadow, but more like an image imprinted on the wall. I slowly walked over to the corner and placed my hand on the wall. I don't know why. When I pulled my hand away, it was covered in a dark dust. I looked closely at the dark image, then I wiped my rag across it. The dust came away onto the rag and powdered into the air. It looked like ash. I wet the rag and wiped the rest of the shadow figure off the wall. I know what you're thinking. Why don't you just leave the house? The short answer is, we did. I spent the whole day alone in the house. I spent that whole day thinking about those words that Jack had said in the night. He's watching us. Then I spent the whole day thinking about that ashen shadow figure on the wall. Then I booked us a hotel room. Jack arrived around 9 p.m. and I already had everything packed. What's going on? Jack asked. I got us a room with a sky view for the night. He dropped his backpack on the floor. Did something happen? I just thought a change of scenery might help you sleep through the night. I don't know, I'm pretty tired already. I was already rolling the suitcase out the front door. The room is already booked and paid for. I'll drive, I called back to him. I didn't tell him that in the suitcase was a new set of lingerie and heels I had ordered a few days ago. I woke up hours later in a king-sized hotel bed, now wearing nothing but sheer nylon thigh highs. The TV was still on and flickering in the corner of the room. Through my bleary vision, I could see the digital clock on the side table, which read 3 a.m. I shot up and reached over to the other side of the bed. I felt Jack's chest. Thank God. I settled into him and closed my eyes. Then I felt Jack's head turn toward me. He made a sound. What? I whispered. What I heard next made my blood run cold. He's watching us. I shot up and looked around the room, and then I saw it. The TV in the corner was now showing nothing but static. Somehow something about it looked off, as if the little static particles were behaving in coordinated patterns of movement. Then I saw it. Within the static, I could see the dark figure of a head and shoulders. It looked just like the shadow figure that appeared in our bedroom. I could barely make out any features, but from the outline of the figure, I could tell it was smiling. He was watching us, and he was smiling. Jack, wake up! Jack didn't move. I kept my eyes locked on the shadowy thing on the TV screen. Jack, wake up! I shouted this time and shook his arm. Jack! He didn't even stir. I remember the TV remote was on the side table. I slowly reached over, keeping my eyes on the man and the static all the while. I felt the remote with the tip of my fingers. I gripped it and quickly mashed the power button. The screen went dark, and so did my vision. My eyes flicked around the pitch black darkness. My vision adjusted and all I saw was the shadowy hotel room. I turned to wake Jack and my heart nearly stopped. Jack wasn't there. He wasn't in the bed. Then I saw him. Jack was standing in front of the TV in corner of the room. Even in the near complete darkness, I could see his unblinking bloodshot eyes staring right at me. A dead smile was plastered on his face. Jack? Jack, wake up, I squeaked. He slowly moved across the room. It looked as though his body wasn't working correctly. He moved like a marionette, twitching and lurching across the room toward me. I looked around for some form of a weapon. I chose the telephone on the side table. I pulled the cord from the receiver and held it up like a club. "Don't come any closer, Jack." His rigor mortis smile continued its slow movement toward me in the darkness. Suddenly, he was only 2 steps away. I stepped forward and swung the phone, connecting hard with the side of his head. I know that the thing I hit with the phone wasn't Jack, not really, but I could feel that my Jack was still in there somewhere. Jack was the love of my life. When I hit him, I couldn't help feeling regret. After I hit him, I hesitated. Not for long, but long enough for him to turn back towards me and reach a hand for my throat. I backed away at the last second and bolted for the door. It was too late. He caught me by the arm. The last thing I remember was my scream being choked out by a hand gripping my throat and squeezing hard. I woke up in our bedroom. I was on my knees, bound with duct tape around my ankles, wrists, and mouth. In front of me was Jack. He was kneeling, facing the dark corner of our bedroom. His head was flung back and he was rapidly whispering something. It looked as though he was in prayer or some kind of religious fervor. And then I saw it. The dark shadows in the corner of the bedroom seemed to darken even more. A shape emerged, a head, then shoulders and arms. At first, the shape appeared as a silhouette. Then it seemed to emerge from the wall and take solid form. A face was coming through our bedroom wall, and it was darker than dark, and smiling, a horrible smile. The same smile I saw plastered across Jack's face. Jack's whispering became more urgent. He spread his arms out to either side. The dark thing opened its eyes, and they were pitch black. Its arms emerged from the wall. They were long, and its hands extended out into narrow, endless fingers. It reached out and put its hands around Jack's throat. I tried again to scream. The thing's hands moved up and gripped Jack's head. Then, with one quick motion, snapped his head around completely. I'll never forget the look on Jack's face. He was smiling. I screamed and cried. The dark thing pulled Jack into the corner of the room and somehow pulled him through the wall. Jack's body was gone, and I was left alone in the bedroom, screaming through the duct tape on my mouth. I toppled onto my side and screamed until my voice box shattered, and then I kept screaming. I slammed my knees into the ground, making as much noise as possible. I don't know how long it was before the police showed up. They asked me what happened. I couldn't speak after screaming for hours, so I had to write it all down on one of the notepads. I told them what I'm now telling you. They didn't say as much, but they clearly didn't believe me. Jack's fingerprints were on the duct tape that I was bound with, and technically, he is the one that attacked and restrained me. My claim that he was under some kind of supernatural possession to them just read as a defense mechanism against the domestic abuse that they believed I had suffered. Every so often, an officer checks in with me to see if I know where Jack is or if I've heard from him. They believe he's on the lam somewhere. I'm living with my family now. I sleep with all the lights on, if I'm lucky to get any sleep at all. Lately, there's been power outages in the neighborhood. They didn't start until I started living with them. I don't know why that thing took Jack and didn't take me. I can only assume that one of these nights, it'll come back. Now, this next story is actually special because it comes from one of my Discord users. Shout out to Discord user Yankee, and yeah, this is a story that he submitted. So yeah, if you want your story to be included in one of these videos, then go ahead and join my Discord, hit me up, and yeah, we'll get this worked out. I'll leave a link to this story in the description for him, and yeah. I was haunted by a ghost of myself. I don't really know how to start this, so I guess I'll just lay out some important info. First and foremost, I don't suffer from any mental illness or disorder as far as I know. Since I was a child, I have been tested and my family has no history of mental illness. Second, English is not my first language. I was born and lived all my life in Poland. Third, my name is Dokosla. This will come later. That being said, after I hang out with my friends over beer last night, I was convinced by them to share my experience somewhere safe, and I choose here to meet people who are into this kind of stuff. The memory is still fresh and still lingers in my brain daily. I don't quite understand what happened. I'm hoping that writing this out and letting others who don't ridicule me or call me insane might put me at ease, and maybe help me wrap my mind around as I go on, and around who I was as a person just months ago. To be fair though, I do feel kind of dumb posting this in a subreddit of all places. It all started around 7 months ago when I moved into an apartment near my college that was bought by my parents. It was cheap but cozy, and it didn't do any damage to my family's bank account. The house was a small, white, wooden hut with a black triangle roof with a few tiles missing, 4 windows on each side of the house, and a small backyard. I was unsettled from the start though. Ever since I first saw it, I felt unsettled. The house looked pretty normal. There was nothing to be afraid of, it was just a small house. Yet, I wanted to sprint away from it as quickly as my human legs could allow me to. I couldn't though. It was the only place I could go, not like I could ask my parents to rent me or buy another apartment. As well off as we aren't made of money. I may sound like I'm bragging, which is fair, but I'm saying this to explain why I stayed and the sheer fear. Maybe I'm just using excuses. Anyways, off the tangent. The house had a very small lawn with freshly cut, very short beige grass. However, the second red flag and first strange occurrence was the wooden fence, or half of it. Half of the fence was just gone. I considered tearing it down, but didn't go through with it before moving out. I actually asked the quiet old lady who lived nearby what's up with the fence when she welcomed me. She said that a year or two ago before I moved in, it was just random, disappeared, or well, half of it. She assumed it was vandals, but mentioned that others who lived closer had different ideas, which I soon learned. Another strange thing I noticed that I was sure was a coincidence was the 2 houses next to mine. They were up for sale. They were unoccupied and they were huge. Both coincidentally sandwiched my apartment. By this time, I had known something was off but kept it to myself, mostly focusing on befriending and hanging out with my colleagues as well as studying. I mostly put my concerns to the back of my head. The aura, the fence, and the houses. It was sort of like how in most paranormal accounts, the malicious spirit can spread its evil, warn others, and affect reality. The apartment itself was one big space with a bed, windows, and a big kitchen, heaters, paintings, table, 5 chairs, pool table, desk, and chandelier, with a separate spacious bathroom, where was also a ladder that when pulled down would lead to the attic, which I usually just ignored as I don't really mess with like small dark spaces because of horror movies. But it was generally just a very good apartment. Over the course of 3 days, I unpacked and settled in. I invited people I met at the college in. I summed up the unnerving feeling I felt when in front of the house for the very first time as just simple stress. Though I did keep in mind the other strange things. And hey, I didn't get many noise complaints from my neighbors. My 4th red flag was on day 13. I woke up at night half asleep because of a loud noise, which retroactively I remember sounding like someone playing pool. I didn't think much through it and eventually went back to sleep. It isn't uncommon for me to wake up and fall asleep right after. Later, I woke up to everything I put in the room being rearranged. Not like thrown around everywhere, but rearranged. The strangest part was that all the objects moved were mine and mine alone. The furniture stayed the same. My phone was on the other side of the bed. My food was unpacked. The meat and vegetables were separated in the fridge. The backpacks were in the closet. The clothes were rearranged from how I left them and neatly laid, and the pool table had been used, which I haven't since 6 days before this incident. I quickly got up and, in panic, called the cops before even dressing up. For the next 3 days, I stayed at the apartment of a girl I knew that I quickly began dating after this. My impulsive call to the police had its consequences, however. The police checked the house and said there were no signs of a break-in. There was no further investigation, and I felt judged. One of the cops did suggest that for peace of mind, I should install Ring cameras. Many people in my college asked me what happened, and I simply answered that some asshole tried to break into my house. After 3 days, I moved back in, without my parents knowing anything had happened. I returned to my routine. After this incident, I felt too lazy to do anything to my house for safety, and just assumed the douche wouldn't try it again. I also work out, so I was confident that I could just dropkick the guy. Around this time, I made a new discovery about my house too, the phone reception. Often, when I was in my apartment, the connection just got really choppy. I assumed it to be just the crappy connection, but then I found out the calls work completely fine outside my property. It was just calls too, especially video calls. Everything else worked completely okay in my property. At this point, I was contemplating calling my parents for the first time in weeks to ask for a change in apartments, but I wasn't sold on it yet. That was until a day later, 4 days after the supposed break-in. I woke up and it happened again. Everything was rearranged. I wasn't as shaken as last time, but I called the police again. They came, no signs of a break-in, no clues. They even checked the attic for a squatter. No signs either, they just found a bunch of empty bags, boxes, and trash that you'd expect from a haunted house, like a rope. They were pretty sure I was just a prank caller and told me to stop calling them or I would face criminal charges, although I'm not sure if they were bluffing or not. Though I can tell they had their doubts in even that, probably due to my unwavering expression of terror. At this point, I had figured out I can't get authorities involved again, at least not for a while, and that whatever was happening wasn't exactly harmful. I decided to call my parents and ask for an apartment change, and I explained my situation. They didn't comment much aside from just telling me that they can't buy me a new apartment or rent one out, so that was no use. I decided to sleep over at my friend's house, but not before installing cameras in my apartment to watch. After I woke up, went to my lessons, and got back home, everything was rearranged again. However, it was way messier. The attic was opened, one of the shelves in my closet was open, and my bed sheets were thrown off the bed. After climbing the ladder with a flashlight and pocket knife, I noticed nothing was amiss up there. After cleaning everything up and securing the attic entrance for my own sanity, I checked the camera footage. The camera footage just wasn't camera footage. It was a bunch of pixels with no pattern or reason. It was like you went into MS Paint and vomited out the entire color palette. Now, even though I might not seem like it, I am a spiritual Christian person, even if I'm not the best follower. So my conclusion is that this house was most likely haunted. It explained most of the activity. The aura, the houses, the cameras, the rearrangements, opening shelves, etc. So I decided to call a priest to bless the house the next day. It was quite fast. I felt better about it, but I still kept myself on guard. At this point, I barely slept at night. However, after the priest left, things kept getting more confusing. The activity did not stop. The next day, I woke up to the sounds of footsteps right by my bedside. They were clear and frantic. I jumped up and the footsteps quickened. I have no idea where they went, but it was like someone had vaulted as I woke up, yet there was no one. I prayed to God it did not stop, so I resorted to every other religion there was for help. None of the gods answered. Over the course of the next few weeks, things kept getting worse, and it really affected my life. I stopped hanging out, I stopped going to classes, which I already skipped. I talked to my girlfriend only about the terrors, which led to her leaving me. I stopped showering as much, I ate lots of food, and I wasn't even worried since my parents paid for everything. Now, to just list everything that's happened in this time span in terms of weird activity. Cameras still didn't work. Things were still rearranged, but now more carelessly. I stayed up at night seeing things randomly open. At times, I saw things just float. I often broke them and yelled as if that would scare the ghost away. The attic was not opened again. I bolted certain things like the fridge and hid the key, yet they still managed to be opened. At times in the mirror, I just didn't see myself for a moment. It was similar to how areas take time to render inside the game, except it was the image of me in the mirror like a vampire. And the biggest action, which leads into the part where I started being extremely concerned for my well-being. One day I woke up and felt a cold breeze. At the foot of my door outside my apartment stood my neighbor who yelled, "Hey." I freaked out upon realizing it was my neighbor and my door was just open. It was very early too. I quickly jumped out of bed in my boxers to confront the old man. He then proceeded to explain something that put me in way more panic. When he woke up, he saw my door just wide open. This specter was now opening my door. It was putting me in actual danger. I couldn't even bolt the door. It wouldn't work. I mean, how would I get out? The windows? It could open them too. This ghost, at least to me, didn't seem to want to actually kill me or anything. It just liked messing with me. Or at least I thought. And obviously things just got worse and worse. If this door opening kept on going as a regular occurrence every night, someone could break in. I could freeze. I could die. Those thoughts went through my mind. I started attending classes despite sleep deprivation and sudden crippling fear because of concerns over my huge number of absences. It actually proved quite useful as I had a distraction from my house. Still no energy to party around. I became less dynamic, like I was way more quiet and put together. However, the paranormal activity continued. I started hearing shouts around my house, especially at night, and objects I never owned started appearing out of nowhere. Books I never even heard of, some brand new. Sometimes I just saw things being opened up by something invisible as if I was living with a masked roommate. I felt breath sometimes. I often felt watched when doing things. I had no more incidents with the doors though, thankfully. Blinds would be down even if I put them up. I even saw them being closed in real time once. I tried recording this on my phone, but of course as soon as weird stuff began it malfunctioned. I know, convenient. Things I remember appeared to altered. Once I remembered I saw a paper I wrote randomly corrected by myself, even though I hadn't done it. I even briefly considered that maybe I have multiple personalities or something, but I disregarded that idea quickly. I mostly distracted myself with Netflix, YouTube, and Instagram since I didn't talk to others that much, but even that wouldn't work as it would quickly just switch to another show or setting. It really was like having an obnoxious roommate, except it was a ghost. I woke up to my food being eaten. Thankfully, it wasn't eaten all the way through usually. Sometimes the food just seemed off. The half-eaten food was sometimes bitten into or just randomly cut. Things got very trippy here. I can't describe it exactly, but the textures of everything started being different. I smelled different scents. I can't quite explain it. And remember that fence I mentioned? Well, I found the other half. It was stuck in my wall, somehow. It looked like a clipping error in a video game. Half of it was just in the wall with no depression or sign of being put there. It was as if it was always there. I tried touching it, but I clipped through it too. I couldn't grab it. I couldn't sense it. I couldn't feel its presence. It was like a texture without a model. And as soon as I turned around and looked back, it just vanished. At times when sleeping, I would hear weeping next to me, to which I would scream in anger and fear until my throat turned sore, only to make the crying louder. A familiar crying. I didn't know why at first, but found out later. During this time frame, I also had a part-time job. I worked 4 hours a week. It didn't pay well, but it was something and really put into perspective how I never really worked for anything much. I also kept begging my parents to change apartments, to which they kept saying no. But I could tell we were slowly going down under the pressure. At this point, I started feeling very happy, actually. I talked to others again, all because I knew I'd leave this cursed house behind. But at the same time, I did have a realization. What if I'm followed by the ghost? I doubted it since it didn't bother me outside my property, but it was good to consider regardless. I also thought about whether I can get rid of the ghost, which led me down a rabbit hole of searching up the house's history. Not much was known or mentioned, but what I did know is that the house was constructed in 1993 and had at least 5 different occupants. One was a family, the other a college girl, another a man, another a couple, and one someone who lived there for a quick job at the city I couldn't get the gender of, with them all leaving and describing the place as haunted. Luckily to my reassurance, no one there has died, so that was positive, but also begged the question, why was the house actually haunted? By now it had been 5 months. My parents agreed to change apartments since I actually started working, and everything went underway. My new apartment would be smaller, quite cheaper, but closer to my college, and despite that, I was glad. The last few nights in the house surprisingly weren't that chaotic, up until the final 4 cycles I spent calling this apartment home. I woke up to a noose tied from the rope that was in the attic, which was now unbolted. Throughout the day, strangely nothing happened. It was like the ghost committed suicide. I was extremely confused, but didn't feel like trying to wrap my head around it. Over the next few days, the activity returned. Things were rearranged, taken away. Everything was open as if looked through. New things appeared like untouchable Android phones or drinks. At one point I found a piece of police tape that after roughly half an hour vanished without a trace. Strange things were happening not only at night but in the daytime as well. All my previous thoughts just kind of were thrown out the window. I didn't get this. What did I actually experience? Should I care? Why did the activity briefly stop? What was with the rope? Was this even my concern now as I had only a day left? I had answers to none of these. I was left speechless, with my thoughts devoid of answers. On the day I packed, I found a note. I felt like since I was leaving and the ghost died, or at least was role-playing a crime scene, I could take a picture, which I did. Clear as day. I tried taking the note, but it vanished from my pocket as soon as I left. I honestly don't know if it was left on purpose or not. I don't honestly know what to say about the note, which feels wrong because of its contents. I am just at a loss for words, so the best I can do is actually give you a transcript of it. Make of it what you will. This place is an unnatural glitch in the natural order of things. It is comparable to 2 plates stacked on top of one another, overlapping, the liquids and crumbs falling from one to another, and once the washing machine turns on, mixing with one and other. This place, by all laws of the universe, shouldn't exist. It is an error. It is a mistake of the creator. May this place be torn down to its atoms. The ghost is me. To Coast Law.